Hello to the aliens and the alienated. My name is TB Skyn. And what's the deal with the Xenomorph? This is a little bit out of left field for my YouTube channel. I usually talk about bright and colorful video game characters, although technically the Xenomorph is a video game character. This is a render from the video game Alien Isolation. But I got a comment on one of my videos asking if I wouldn't do a video on the Xenomorph, and the moment I read that, it kind of clicked for me that, yeah, I kind of should do that, because the Xenomorph is, without a doubt, one of the most influential character designs of the 20th century. In fact, in my opinion, you kind of have to divide the history of monster designs in media into two eras. Everything that came before the Xenomorph and everything that has come since. Because when this guy hit the screens of the cinemas in 1979 for the first time, audiences had never seen anything quite like this. There hadn't been another monster quite this bizarre, quite this intimidating, quite this unusual. And ever since then, at least for me, every monster design I see in a movie, whether it be sci-fi or literally anything else, has had to declare itself somewhere on the sliding scale of the Xenomorph. Like, is it more like the Xenomorph? Is it more like this alien, hostile, almost cosmic horror-esque abomination from beyond the stars with which you cannot reason? Or is it a criticism of it, or a reaction away from it? For me, it's become the scale by which I judge movie monsters at all, is by whether it can achieve just this level of profound scary. But for all the genius that's involved in the creature design of the alien, it is nonetheless a character design that can be analyzed with many of the same tools that we usually use in these videos. And so, one of the most obvious features of the alien is its total and complete lack of eyes. This is a very basic thing in character design. The human brain is programmed to scan for faces. Like, anytime a human being has to consider any image, the first thing the brain will look for is faces. Like, if there's a face in an image, the human brain will find it. It's the first place it'll go, and the very first place on the face that the human brain will go is the eyes. And so, when you deny the human brain those eyes, you make the thing more alien. This is why we have subreddits like pareidolia, which again I'm probably mispronouncing, but where people post pictures of random inanimate objects that are seen from a particular angle or in a particular light, whereby they suddenly appear to have a face where none really technically should exist. This is only possible because the human brain is so profoundly programmed to look for facial patterns in things. And so one of the most fundamental ways in which you can alienate a person from a creature when you design it is to deny us the opportunity to see the eyes. Now, this doesn't always have to be used for horror purposes. If you look at any Fire Emblem game, or like a hell of a lot, especially in Japanese media, but it's a trick that's used across the board. If you want to make a character disposable, interchangeable, unimportant, well, just don't show the eyes. Fire Emblem is my go-to example for this, because there's always, in every single game, there's the design of a soldier that looks like this. There's a face, sure, but there is a kind of horrifying mannequin-like lack of eyes to go along with it. But this is also something you can see in a game like Gears of War, where all the important playable characters run around with no helmet on, and all the characters who are entirely disposable grunts that don't really matter to the story, they tend to have their helmets on, hiding their faces, hiding their eyes. So taking away the eye is the first and most basic way in which you make the thing kind of weird and scary and unpleasant, but then that's not enough to create an iconic design, just taking away the eyes. Plenty of characters don't have eyes and aren't anywhere near as scary as the alien. So what else is going on here? Well, the alien is a study in profound and rather terrifying contrasts. It's perhaps best on display in this high detail render from Alien Isolation, but take a look at the smooth, glossy, kind of almost slimy looking surface of the alien's head and its face, also on display right here. It's almost translucent, right? You can see that there are structures inside this elongated dome, and it makes it look insectoid, almost kind of like a bug of some kind, like a larva that's trapped inside a pupa. But then contrast that smooth, glossy, it almost looked like it would be pleasant to touch, kind of smooth and friendly. But then contrast that with the design on the rest of the body of this poor, miserable creature, because the alien looks like nothing so much as a skeleton. That's very much what it looks like. It has a rib cage that is prominently on display, and bones almost crowning out of its skin all the way around it. It has this emaciated look, almost like the victim of some kind of a famine. And compare and contrast the profound glass-like smoothness of its head with all of this roughness, all of these weird contrasting textures, all of this sort of, everything's kind of ridged and rugged and looks slimy and cold and almost metallic. The alien is a fusion of technological imagery with the biological, which is why I'm focusing on contrast, because you have the extremely biological look, not only of its head, but also of other parts of the creature, like its flesh and its muscle and the sinews that tie it together. But then you have all of these tubes that are embedded all over the creature's body, almost as though it is the product of some mad science experiment. Especially this render from Alien Isolation operationalizes that concept very strongly, which is something that also appears very strongly in its original concept art, which we will get to momentarily. But take a look at all the tubes, all the signs of almost workmanship. Like, the alien looks like a sculpture, like it was crafted by someone. And that contrast with also being a biological living creature is unnerving. It's unnatural. It's not how things should be. Inanimate objects should not look like they hate you, essentially, is what's going on there. So we have the combination of death imagery. We have the combination of death imagery with, you know, the smooth glossiness that denies us access to a face, along with these unpleasant textures. Like, it... Besides the head, no part of the alien looks like it would be pleasant to run your fingers across. No part of the alien looks like it might be nice to touch, unless you have a particular kink for that kind of thing, in which case I'm not judging you, I'm just saying in general, for most people, this is not their perfect ideal of a cuddle buddy. And then there are the teeth. Those awful teeth. I don't know if you've ever seen the pictures that people like to Photoshop, the memes online sometimes, where people like to put human teeth in places where human teeth really shouldn't be. Or if you've seen the picture of that particular fish, if you Google fish with human teeth, you will see, you really shouldn't Google that actually, because it's absolutely horrifying. But having human teeth inserted in places, like human looking teeth rather, where they really shouldn't belong, is also just, it's not, shouldn't be there. Like, one of my recurring nightmares when I have bad anxiety, and a nightmare I know a lot of people have, involves all of my teeth falling out of my mouth or breaking. And it's a terrible nightmare. I hate it every time it happens, but it's a really common nightmare because human beings, we have hang-ups about our teeth, and putting teeth there in that face where they should not be is bad. I don't like it. It's just everything about that is repulsive and unpleasant and wrong. It's just bad, and I don't know what it is about it specifically, but it's just the relative human shape of this jaw, like, because you could do so many other things with the arrangement of the teeth. Is the thing I'm focusing on here, is the arrangement of the teeth, because it has a jaw and an upper, you know, and an upper mouth that is rather human-like. Like, it has a clear chin, it's got stuff going on, but then the rest of the face, the contrast, it's always the contrast. That's for me, that's really the thing that makes the alien so alienating, is the contrast between the smoothness and this rough unpleasantness, between the biological and the technological, between the human and the profoundly inhuman. Here we get, I'm not really sure exactly where this image is from. I think it might be from a comic adaptation. It's kind of hard, weirdly, to find good images of the original alien suit that was in the original film, but this is a good representation of some of the aesthetics that underlie the design, because here you really get a look at all the tubes and all the weird stuff that's going on. It's almost like the entire creature is translucent, like it has no skin, but what you're seeing is all the structures that lie underneath the skin. And again, that thing of taking something that is somewhat familiar and making it profoundly unfamiliar by just tweaking things a little bit, like putting the ribcage on the outside of the skin. It does a lot to mess with you. And then there are these pipes, or horns, or whatever the heck they may be. It's really unclear what they are, but they too look kind of industrial. They look almost like chimneys to me, like steam, or, you know, some kind of air should be puffing out of them as the engine that must be inside this biomechanical creature runs. Or they look like air intakes. Maybe they are how it breathes. Whatever they are for, they have this, just this weird, they're not straight, but they're not really shaped like the antlers of a deer would be either. They are almost like they were supposed to be a lot longer, but someone cut them off halfway. That's what they look like to me, like something that was meant to attach to something else, almost like there were pipes attaching them to the wall of some ancient, terrible factory, and then someone just kind of sliced them off and left a stump where the rest of the structure should be. And again, that sense of the creature almost being unfinished, almost like it was a working sketch that you were supposed to put some more stuff on top of it to make it look less horrifying, and then you kind of just lost interest and let it go. Now, in order to talk more specifically about some of the visual themes that underlie the Alien itself, we kind of have to talk about the Alien's inventor and designer, a man named Hans-Rudi Giger, and I'm probably mispronouncing that. He's a Swiss artist, or he was, anyway. He died some years ago, who was famous for, well, this exact kind of thing. These are airbrush works where he is extremely fascinated with the interplay between the biological and the technological. This look right here is what he's famous for, and it's a look that's going to be in pretty much all of the stuff that we're going to be examining. He worked in many different mediums, like he even designed furniture once upon a time. Terrifying furniture, but furniture nonetheless, for a Dune movie that was never actually produced. And he has been a tremendously influential artist, but one of the primary things that Hans-Rudi Giger was interested in was the interplay between the biological and technological, and indeed the sexual and the technological. And this too is one of the keys to the terror of the Alien's design. Now, if you look at the head of the Alien in this production sketch of the creature, if you feel like that looks kind of a little bit phallic, maybe it's just a little bit like a dick, well, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. That was very much, they toned it down for the actual creature design that was put in the movie, but once upon a time, this was one of the production sketches for the Alien itself, and I'm probably gonna get demonetized now, but I'm accepting it because I really do want to talk about this, because the sexual, the inclusion of the sexual and the sensual is very much a hallmark of Giger's particular art style and his particular fascination with this interplay between the technological and the physical and the biological. But it's also part of the terror of the Alien. One of the things that is the most scary about the Alien, and anyone who's watched the film will know this, is the way that they reproduce, where a face hugger will attach itself to whatever available orifice it can get a hold of and lay eggs inside the host that will then hatch and burst out into a new creature that will go on to mature into the alien itself. And that fear, that profound terror that all human beings share of being bodily violated, of having your body taken over to be used by something else, as food, or as a breeding ground, or as an egg sac, to be turned from a living being with agency into just a sack of flesh that is serving the purpose for someone else. That is a profound terror that I think pretty much all humans share, and that is also part of the reason for this. The alien's protruding extra inside mouth too is a thrusting motion of a phallic thing that comes towards you and seeks to penetrate you, and that too ties into that deep-seated human fear of being violated by something, which H.R. Giger was profoundly aware of and extremely fascinated by. A lot of his artwork features, well, this. Figures that are sensual, often female, being penetrated by or penetrating other things by use of technology. This female alien woman creature's breasts become elongated spikes that penetrate the head of this creature, whose position between her legs almost kind of indicate that it is a protrusion from her crotch, and it has this baby-like face hanging around out here, because Giger was also deeply fascinated with birth imagery and with pregnancy imagery, which features heavily in his artwork. So we're not going to be taking a look at any of those because they are just, oh, good lord. But the more you look at this picture, the more you kind of, at least for me, you kind of become confused, because your brain, at least my brain, is struggling to figure out, is this meant to be horrifying, or is this hot to someone? Is this someone's sexual fantasy? Is this someone's sexual nightmare? And that uncertainty, that feeling of looking at something that should be sensual and pleasant, but having it corrupted in this way, because there's intimacy, weirdly, between this distorted figure with its tongue lolling out of its head and these soft, round lips on this terrifying woman creature. It is almost a perversion, a parody, some kind of weird, freaky nightmare scenario of sexual intimacy and lust and softness. And softness, by the way, is almost never present in Giger's artwork. Everything here, none of it looks soft. Much of it looks smooth, but none of it looks soft. All of it looks like if you touched it, it would be rigid and unpleasant and probably rather cold. Here's one of the other production sketches for the alien. Here you can see he has retained the idea of giving the alien eyes, but he has distorted the eye almost beyond all recognition. Ultimately, he went away from this, but you can kind of see the difference that it makes in giving the creature an actual face to look at as compared to the wrongness of this kind of completely smooth, having no face whatsoever. There's a series of mannequins, by the way, in one of the towns, one of the shops in the city where I live. There is a lingerie shop which has a bunch of mannequins in its windows to display its products, you know, obviously. But the thing about these mannequins is that they have the top half of their head cut off. Like, you get the bottom of the nose and you get the lips on the figure, and then you get, you know, everything else of the figure, that, like the shape of the breasts and the hips and all of that and so forth. But the top of the head, like halfway up at the bridge of the nose, has just been sheared off and just taken away. And I always find those mannequins profoundly disturbing for the same reason that this is profoundly disturbing. It's that implication that something human might have been here, except all of this got in the way. This, oh, by the way, you know, I mentioned there was an unproduced film version of Frank Herbert's Dune novels, for which H.R. Giger designed some concept artwork before the whole thing was scrapped and eventually remade by David Lynch later on down the line. But here we see the return of a familiar shape and a familiar figure. I think this is supposed to be a spice collector, I'm not sure. But you see that shape appear again. That head with the profoundly elongated wrong shape. It's a figure that's been in H.R. Giger's imagination for a long time, and which he found expression with in the Alien movie. And here we have another one of his pieces that kind of, you know how I said he had a profound fascination with birthing imagery? Well, here you go. Distorted babies, flesh corrupted, twisted this way and that, integrated as part of some horrifying machine whose meaning you cannot really decipher. Distorted, turned almost into a pig to the slaughter in some kind of weird, bizarre hellhouse. Some kind of weird, bizarre slaughterhouse, an abattoir of technology with no meaning. That's the other thing about the machines and machine designs that H.R. Giger creates. They have no obvious function. They have no meaning. They don't seem to be creating or producing anything. They are machines that exist entirely for their own sake, that exist to make things part of them. Systems of exploitation and extraction and injection that go nowhere, or they go everywhere. It's impossible to tell. And by the way, yeah, the sexual imagery is more obvious than perhaps ever before, and so is the birthing imagery. You can see here there's a tube attached to this female figure's womb. H.R. Giger's artwork has the unique distinction of being both profoundly unpleasant, but also really difficult to look away from. It's difficult to ignore. It's difficult not to be fascinated once you see it, even as everything that the image tells you is repulsive and unpleasant something about it still pulls at you, calls to you a little bit, draws you in, if nothing else, for the same reason that cars might slow down to look at a car that's overturned on the side of the road or a massive road accident. There's just something about the profoundly wrong and unpleasant that tends to draw the human attention. So, you know how I said everything since the Alien has kind of had to declare itself? Well, let's have a look at a few examples. This is a boss from Contra, and you can see the H.R. Giger influence rich in the character design here, which is something that the Contra series like to do rather a lot. Here we have those alien back spouts, those horns, those air vents, whatever they may be, being used for a Contra boss in the original NES game, and that same kind of inserting a human set of teeth in a place where it doesn't belong, and the tubes with these constant ridgings being present as well as in the Ninja Gaiden games, where we have this boss monster in stage 6-5, which is profoundly Giger inspired. And if you take a look at this particular character sprite, you might also recognize it from a game like Super Metroid, which has a number of creature designs that declare themselves very strongly on the Giger side of design aesthetic. The Alien and Giger and all of his artwork has inspired a profound range of creature designs through the ages. Without the Alien, there really wouldn't be the Zerg. Without the Alien, there definitely wouldn't be the Tyranids from Warhammer. You wouldn't really have Mother Brain. You wouldn't really have whatever the hell this thing is from Ninja Gaiden. You wouldn't have that particular sensibility of the 1980s NES games, where the monster designs, like, one of the selling points that the games had was that they would do these incredible sprite designs for monsters and bosses that you could fight in the game, because that was really the only thing you could do with graphics back then, was to create something that looks so weird and so dense and so off-putting, because you really didn't have the graphical capability to do much more. And that's the clever thing about bosses like this, is, if I remember my, NES computer game architecture correctly, when you had sprites, you could create things like these guys here, or the Mario sprite and stuff like that. But what you couldn't do is create complex illustrations like this. So often bosses in the games would be defined as background elements, as tile sets in the background of the thing. And that's what allowed the Alien designs inspired by stuff like H.R. Giger to be so effective, is that you could essentially create tiles of design, of patterns, of these weird, bizarre, unnerving shapes that repeat themselves over and over again, and you could save space on the cartridge. It's a fun little... reasonably sure I'm correct about that, but you could repeat the same shapes over and over again in order to create this compelling monster design, and, save on a lot of space on the cartridge, because you didn't have to include original art for every single tile. Anyway, that was just a little thing that came to mind. So, having talked a lot about that sensuality and sexuality of the H.R. Giger designs, and now you take a look at this, and no, it doesn't look particularly sexually appealing, but there's something about it that is weirdly sensual. It's almost like a man in a latex suit, right? It's because it is so emaciated, because everything about it is so thin and so stretched to the bone, it is like you can see into it. You get an insight into its flesh, into its body, and that is horrifying. But much like the rest of H.R. Giger's artwork, despite being horrifying and repulsive, it's also really hard to look away from. And is there any monster worse than a terrifying monster that you don't want to look at, but who you find yourself constantly compelled to turn back and stare at? I really don't think there is. Yeah, I mean, there's no getting over this. Once you've seen it, you've seen it forever. It's never going to stop being part of your visual imagination, and for a lot of people, it's probably never going to stop being part of their nightmares. Anyway, I think that's about all I had to say about it. H.R. Giger. What a genius. What a terrifying, awful genius. So, if you've enjoyed this somewhat unusual for me video, then you should feel free to hit the like button down below. You can also subscribe to the channel if you are so inclined. I also do have a Patreon where you can head on over, and if you have $1 that you won't miss, that you're not using for anything else right now, it could buy me a meal, which would be good. I like meals. Meals are good. So is rent. Rent is fantastic. It's just like, fucking love paying rent. It's great. I love giving away my money. If you don't want to do that, if you dislike the video, of course, you can also click on the dislike button down below. But I have to warn you that the dislike button is a thin shell hiding a horrifying monstrosity of merged technology and flesh, which will erupt through your screen and envelop your entire house and trap you forever in an industrial nightmare that is ceaseless and without end. So, you know, depending on how you feel today, 50-50 on whether you should click on it. Thank you very much for watching.